Hello readers, I'm Amy, and today I'm going to do a mostly spoiler-free review of How to Sell a Haunted House. I've already had people asking me about reviewing this. If you've been watching my previous, most recent videos, you'll know that recently I've been through a lot emotionally, and that actually ties into this book quite a bit. So my concentration has been a little shaky, and then with my kind of emotional connections to this book, it took me a little bit longer to go through than it normally would have. But we're going to talk about all of that in this review. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Anything, at least that I say at the beginning of this video, you will have already known just by kind of reading through the plot synopsis for this book. So I might do some spoilers later. I will let you know if that happens. But let's go ahead and talk about this book. So this was released on January 17th. I pre-ordered it like last summer because it was supposed to come out last summer, and it didn't because he's like, he posted some note saying I have to figure out what to do with all the puppets and dolls that I'm dealing with. So it was some funny little note. I can try and find a picture to put up here. But we have Louise and Mark. They're our main characters. They're siblings, and their parents have died in a car accident. Mark gets a hold of Louise to tell her all of this 2 days after it's occurred, which is rough to find out that your parents died 2 days ago and you're just finding out now. Like, that really kind of sets the stage for Louise being the older sibling who's kind of got her life together, who knows what she wants, who's trying to get her parents' stuff organized and take care of what's in the house, figure out if they need to sell it. Like, she's the organized older sibling, take charge person. And then we have Mark. And across the board, everything you hear about this book, like, Mark is awful. I don't know anyone who would actually like the character of Mark, at least at the beginning of the book. He does not have his life together. We hear about all of these projects that he starts and never finishes and how he's really unreliable. I hated Mark so much at the beginning of this book. I will say, typically, this is kind of a sign to me of really great writing and character building when you can make a character so detestable, but then throughout the book, we're getting the backstory of the siblings and their families and how they grew up. And we start to get this background character building for these characters. And not to say that Mark, for me, was ever really a likable character, but we get a better understanding of him, and we get some perspective and some insight into things that happened previously that shaped his character that we might have gotten the wrong idea of first. So it's like, if you just hear about Mark from Louise's perspective, then you're like, hey, this guy's a piece of shit. But in getting to know Mark and his background and things that happened that Louise might not have learned about, you get a little more insight into the character, and you're like, oh, this kind of makes sense. So I loved that we got that from Grady Hendrix. I will say, overall, and this could just be a me thing, like I said, my concentration has been kind of shot lately. I'm working on building up to reading more books and reading for longer periods of time, but it's just kind of hard for me to concentrate on anything. But it felt like this book was really slow. I have gotten more into slow burn books. I can appreciate a good slow burn book. But this one, it really took its time. It took me a while to get through. I don't know that there's too much that I would have necessarily cut from it, but it reminded me a lot of when I first tried to read The Shining by Stephen King, which is not a book that I've ever finished and really have any interest in reading. But I remember you hear so many great things about the story of The Shining, and I read the first half of the book, and it's all character building and character background, and I was so bored by it. And that's kind of how this book starts. The first, at least quarter of the book, is just character building, and I'm at the point in my reading where I can appreciate that a lot more. But just so you know, if you're looking for a really plot-driven, fast-paced book, this isn't going to be the Grady Hendrix book for you. But that said, I mean, I did appreciate it for what it was. As for the emotional content, that's been a lot for me. So I mentioned this a video or two ago, but my mom passed about 2.5 months ago. So that's been a lot. That's why I didn't post as much as usual last year, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, to dealing with the health of a family member and trying to help them get stuff organized and get stuff together. And I don't want to say that if you're triggered by parental death that you shouldn't read this book, because everyone is going to be coping with that kind of thing in their own way. Some parts of this book were really hard for me to read. So with my mom's service, we're like, don't wear black. She really loved sunflowers, so we had like packets of sunflower seeds to give away to people. She wanted a celebration of life. And we do get kind of a funeral scene for the parents in here, where the mom, one of the main points of the story is that the mom was a puppeteer. She was some like Christian collective puppeteer, and everyone who gets together at her funeral, like a bunch of the people who were there had known her through her puppeteering and had their own puppets. And you have all these people at this funeral in these colorful costumes with their puppets and their character hats on, being the character of their puppets. And that was really cool to see, and I could kind of relate it back to my own experience, where traditionally there's this idea that you wear black and you're in mourning. But then through this book and through my own experience and suggestions that we had for my mom's service, you can find that you can really put a lot of personality into a funeral that I wasn't aware of before I organized my mom's. I look up ideas and I talk to her about it beforehand, and it's like, oh, a funeral doesn't have to be about black and about mourning. And I love that he explored that in this book and really showed the personality that you can put into a service like that, where you're celebrating someone's life and the things that they found interesting. Then we also have just this idea of the parental house and what to do with it. Whenever I went there around the time that everything was kind of ending, I start going through all this stuff. Like, I was organizing photo albums and trying to come up with timelines for stuff so I can like organize it and you can see kind of the progression of life. And Grady Hendrix did a pretty decent job of that, really, where we're going through the character's house or the parents' house. And you're seeing all of these puppets. And at one point there's a conversation between the siblings where she's like, do you want to keep any of this? And Mark's like, no, I don't have any use for the puppets. And so she goes through and starts throwing these puppets and these dolls into a trash bag. And he's like, well, wait, don't get rid of that. That has such and such a memory behind it. Well, wait, remember how we got that puppet? And it's just this reminder that it can be so hard to go through that kind of stuff, because you're like, what has sentimental value? What doesn't? Is the sentimental value worth keeping the item? For me, it was Christmas decorations. We had a big house growing up because of the business that my parents ran. And so we had a lot of Christmas decorations. It was my mom's like favorite holiday. She would just go absolutely crazy over the house with Christmas decorations. And I haven't gone through everything, but I went through like one corner of the upstairs storage area where I'm like, what decorations do I want? What decorations should I put up around the house for my dad to kind of make it feel cozier, feel homier? What decorations did we want to bring to the service to maybe dress that up a little? And parts of it were like, oh, this is so cool. Like, this reminds me of her style. I have all these cool memories behind this thing. But then other ones, it's like, it's a really sad memory. Do I hold on to this object? Is it treasuring to me? Is it just triggering me right now? Anyways, I feel like these days I am constantly apologizing for depressing conversations, and I shouldn't be apologizing for that. I kind of want to apologize already for all of the death stuff that I am talking about, but also I do feel that it relates to this book a lot. And again, if you've had a parental death that you've dealt with and you're struggling with that, or even if you're not struggling with it, like, I'm not going to say don't read this book because it has parental death in it and it talks about funerals and it talks about going through the house, because maybe that'll be good for you. And maybe it won't. You're the only one who's gonna know, and you have to navigate it on your own. One thing that got me, that really like hooked me into the book from the very beginning, is that the book starts off talking about the Velveteen Rabbit. So Louise has a daughter who's 5 years old, and her mother had sent her daughter a copy of the Velveteen Rabbit, and Louise is so angry because her mom would read her this book constantly as a kid. And she's like, oh, it's Louise's favorite book. And no, it was the mom's favorite book, and she kept reading it to Louise, and it freaked Louise out, and she didn't want anything to do with it. But her mom sent her daughter, Louise's mom sent Louise's daughter the Velveteen Rabbit. And I so relate to that. I hated the Velveteen Rabbit as a kid. I hated it. I didn't understand why it was a popular book, why anyone would want to read it. I don't want to read it as an adult. I was very connected with my stuffed animals. I still have a teddy bear that I absolutely treasure. It's a very treasured item. And as much as I loved the idea of my stuffed animals coming to life and playing with me and having tea parties and stuff, the Velveteen Rabbit is so depressing. You have this kid who's really sick and they can't keep their animals anymore, so they become real. The toys and stuff become real and go out and live lives, and I'm like, I don't want my stuffed animals to come to life and to have to move away from me because I got sick or something. Like, and I was a sick kid. And I don't want to think about losing all of my stuffed animals because I'm sick enough that they have to be burned or thrown away. Like, that's horrible. Small rant just to say how much I hate the Velveteen Rabbit. But it's really interesting too that a kind of a classic children's story like that, I would say a classic children's horror story for me personally, was a huge inspiration for this book. And you can really see some of the ties there, where you have these treasured objects, these treasured toys and dolls and puppets, and how they become real, how they become infested with memory, how that would relate to their actions if they came to life. And it was really cool to see that inspiration. So I think that's going to be it for this review. I don't think this is a spoiler review. I don't think I really spoiled anything. Anything that I talked about that happened in the book, like the death of the parents in a car accident, like I think that's all pretty much in the plot summary. It's the idea behind how to sell a haunted house. Their parents aren't in this house anymore. You have to figure out what you're going to do with it. So yeah, hopefully this review was okay. It was kind of all over the place. But please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. Leave some comments down below if you've read this book, if you want to read this book. And yeah, I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.